The plasma cannon's whine filled the air as Commander Zektar aimed at the human settlement below. His mandibles clicked with satisfaction as he watched the primitive structures burn. The humans had been foolish to resist the Vorthak Empire's expansion into this sector. Now, they would learn the price of defiance. "Sir, we have visual confirmation of human evacuation routes," reported Lieutenant Yixnell from her position at the tactical display. "They're moving through the eastern valleys, heading toward the mountain caves." Zektar's 6 eyes focused on the thermal readings. Red dots scattered across the mountainous terrain like fleeing insects. Good. Fear would make them easier to hunt. The Vorthak had perfected the art of terror warfare over 3 centuries of galactic conquest. Humans were just another species to be broken and enslaved. "Deploy the hunter squads," he commanded, his voice a low rumble that made nearby technicians flinch. "I want every human settlement in this region reduced to ash within 2 rotations. No survivors except for those suitable for the labor camps." The bridge of the Dreadnought Bone Render buzzed with activity as orders were transmitted to the planetary assault forces. Zektar had commanded this vessel for 12 years, and in that time, he had overseen the subjugation of 17 worlds. Humans would be number 18. Far below on the planet's surface, Dr. Sarah Chun clutched her medical bag tighter as she stumbled through the dense undergrowth. The evacuation had been chaotic, families separated in the panic as Vorthak forces descended from the sky like mechanical vultures. She had stayed behind to help the wounded, and now found herself alone in the wilderness with night approaching. The sound of breaking branches made her freeze. Through the trees, she could see the distinctive blue glow of Vorthak energy weapons. A patrol was moving through the forest, their 6-legged forms moving with predatory grace between the ancient oaks. Sarah pressed herself against a massive tree trunk, trying to control her breathing. "Thermal sweep shows movement in this sector," came a harsh alien voice, translated by her emergency communicator. "Spread out. The humans cannot have gone far." Sarah's heart pounded as she heard the patrol spreading out around her position. She was a xenobiologist, not a soldier. Her knowledge was about healing and understanding alien life forms, not avoiding death squads. The irony wasn't lost on her that she had spent years advocating for peaceful contact with alien species, only to find herself hunted by one. A twig snapped to her left, and she saw one of the Vorthak soldiers moving closer, its weapon raised and scanning. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its chitinous exoskeleton gleaming in the fading light. 4 arms moved independently, 2 holding weapons while the others operated scanning equipment. Its head was triangular, dominated by multiple eyes that could track movement in nearly all directions simultaneously. Sarah held her breath, knowing that a single sound would mean death. The Vorthak were known for their ruthless efficiency. Their empire had swept across this arm of the galaxy, leaving devastated worlds in their wake. Earth had tried to negotiate, offering technology and resources in exchange for peaceful coexistence. But the Vorthak viewed humans as nothing more than a potential labor force. The soldier moved past her hiding spot, and Sarah began to hope she might escape detection. Then she heard something that made her blood freeze. A soft whimpering sound, barely audible, but unmistakably young and frightened. 20 meters ahead, partially hidden behind a fallen log, she could see movement. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized what she was looking at. 3 small shapes huddled together, and they weren't human. They were Vorthak young, but unlike the adult soldiers hunting through the forest. These juveniles were smaller, their exoskeletons still soft and pale. They couldn't have been more than a few months old, still dependent on parental care. Their large eyes were wide with terror as they cowered behind the rotting wood. Sarah's mind raced. What were Vorthak young doing alone in a human forest? Had they been abandoned during the invasion? Were they lost? The adult patrol was moving steadily away from the juvenile's position, apparently unaware of their presence. The whimpering came again, and Sarah saw one of the small Vorthak trying to crawl toward where the patrol had gone, only to collapse weakly. It was injured, a dark stain spreading across its pale carapace. The other 2 juveniles pressed closer to their wounded sibling, making soft clicking sounds that were almost certainly distress calls. Every rational part of Sarah's mind told her to stay hidden. These were the children of her enemies, the offspring of the same species that was systematically destroying human colonies. The smart thing to do was remain concealed until the patrol moved on, then continue her escape to the mountain caves where other survivors were gathering. But as she watched the three small creatures huddling together in terror and pain, her xenobiologist training kicked in. These weren't soldiers or invaders. They were children, alone and frightened in a hostile environment. The injured one was showing signs of shock, its movements becoming increasingly sluggish. Sarah closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She stepped out from behind the tree. The three juveniles immediately saw her movement and pressed closer together, their soft keening becoming more urgent. The injured one tried to raise what looked like a defensive posture, but was too weak to maintain it. Sarah could see now that it had been caught in some kind of explosion, probably from one of their own weapons that had misfired during the chaotic invasion. Moving slowly and keeping her hands visible, Sarah approached the fallen log. The juveniles watched her with eyes that held intelligence and fear in equal measure. She had studied Vorthak anatomy during the brief period of attempted diplomatic contact, and she could see that the wounded juvenile was in serious condition. "Easy," she whispered, not knowing if they could understand her words, but hoping her tone would convey peaceful intent. "I'm not going to hurt you." The injured juvenile was bleeding from a wound that had cracked its carapace near what would be analogous to a shoulder. In adults, the exoskeleton was virtually impenetrable, but in juveniles, it was still developing, leaving them vulnerable. Sarah estimated the creature was losing fluids at a rate that would prove fatal within an hour if not treated. She opened her medical bag and pulled out a field dressing. The other two juveniles chittered in alarm when they saw her approaching their wounded sibling, but they were too small and weak to pose any real threat. Sarah began cleaning the wound, noting with professional interest how the Vorthak circulatory system differed from human anatomy. "Your people are probably looking for you," she said quietly as she worked. "But you're hurt, and they went the wrong way." The wounded juvenile's breathing was shallow and rapid, signs of distress that seemed universal across species. Sarah applied a coagulant gel that should work with most carbon-based life forms, then began wrapping the wound with synthetic bandaging. The other juveniles watched intently, their distress calls becoming less frequent as they seemed to recognize that she was helping rather than harming. As Sarah worked, she became aware of a growing sound in the distance, the deep rumble of Vorthak military vehicles approaching through the forest. The patrol must have called for reinforcements, probably to conduct a more thorough search of the area. The vehicles were getting closer, and Sarah realized she had a choice to make. She could apply a quick field dressing and retreat to a safe distance, leaving the juveniles to be found by their own kind. Or she could stay and make sure the wounded one received proper care, even though it would mean certain discovery. The injured juvenile looked up at her with eyes that held no malice, only pain and confusion. Its siblings had stopped their distress calls and were watching her with what she could only interpret as hope. Sarah Chun had spent her career studying alien life forms, driven by the belief that understanding between species was possible. She had argued countless times that intelligence and emotion weren't uniquely human traits, that consciousness and compassion could be found throughout the galaxy if people just took the time to look. Now she was faced with the ultimate test of those beliefs. The rumble of engines was getting louder, and she could see lights beginning to flicker through the trees. In minutes, this area would be crawling with Vorthak soldiers. If she stayed, she would almost certainly be killed. If she left, the wounded juvenile might not survive long enough for proper medical attention to arrive. Sarah looked down at the small creature whose life was literally in her hands. Its breathing had stabilized somewhat since she had applied the dressing, but it was still in critical condition. The other two juveniles pressed close to their injured sibling, their soft clicks now sounding almost like gratitude. She made her second decision of the night. Sarah Chun, xenobiologist and advocate for interspecies understanding, settled herself protectively over the three Vorthak juveniles as the first armored vehicle broke through the tree line. Its searchlights swept across the forest floor, and she knew they would be spotted within seconds. The vehicle stopped, and she could hear the mechanical whine of weapons powering up. Heavy footsteps approached through the undergrowth, and Sarah found herself face to face with the same patrol that had been hunting her earlier. Behind them came larger soldiers in full battle armor, their weapons trained on her position. Human female, came a translated voice through their communication system. Step away from the juveniles immediately. Sarah didn't move. She could feel the small bodies pressed against her, warm and trembling with fear. The injured one had actually managed to curl one small appendage around her arm, as if recognizing her as protection. I said step away. The voice was harsher now, and Sarah could hear weapons charging to full power. Instead of obeying, Sarah spread her arms wider, creating a more complete shelter over the three juveniles. She looked up at the towering Vorthak soldiers, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. No, she said simply. They're hurt and scared. I won't let you hurt them. The lead soldier's multiple eyes focused on her with what might have been confusion. In the bright glare of the searchlights, Sarah could see more vehicles arriving, and with them came a figure that was clearly of higher rank. The newcomer's armor was more elaborate, marked with symbols that suggested command authority. What is the situation here? The commander demanded as he approached. Human female refuses to surrender, reported the patrol leader. She appears to be protecting the lost juveniles. The commander's eyes studied the scene before him. Sarah maintaining her protective posture over the three small Vorthak, one of whom was clearly wounded and had been recently treated with what appeared to be human medical supplies. You are Dr. Sarah Chun, the commander said, his translated voice carrying a note of recognition. Your file was in the intelligence briefings. Xenobiologist. You argued for peaceful contact with our species. Sarah was surprised he knew who she was, but she didn't let it show. That's right. And right now, these children need medical attention more than they need to be caught in the middle of a war. The commander studied her for a long moment, his weapons still trained on her position. Around them, more soldiers had arrived, creating a circle of armed figures all focused on the human woman protecting three Vorthak young. You realize, the commander said slowly, that those juveniles are not your species. They're the offspring of your enemies. Logical behavior would be to use them as leverage for your own survival. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Maybe that's logical, but it's not right. They're children. They're hurt and afraid, and they don't understand what's happening any more than I do. The injured juvenile made a soft sound and pressed closer to Sarah's side. She could feel its rapid heartbeat beginning to slow as whatever painkiller was in her medical gel started to take effect. The wounded one is stable for now, she continued, but it needs proper medical attention. The wound compromised its circulatory system, and there's risk of infection if it's not properly treated soon. The commander's mandibles clicked in what Sarah hoped was thoughtfulness rather than aggression. Behind him, she could see more soldiers arriving, and among them were figures in different uniforms. Medical personnel, if her knowledge of Vorthak military structure was correct. You have treated the injured juvenile, the commander observed. Why? It was such a simple question, but Sarah realized that her answer might determine not just her own fate, but possibly the future relationship between their species. Because it was the right thing to do, she said. Because compassion shouldn't have species boundaries. Because those are someone's children, and they were in pain. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of alien eyes studying her, trying to understand her motivations. The three juveniles beneath her had gone quiet, seemingly aware that something important was happening. Finally, the commander spoke. Lower weapons, he ordered. The circle of soldiers slowly complied, though Sarah noticed they remained ready to raise them again at a moment's notice. The commander approached slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. I am Commander Zektar of the Dreadnought Bone Render, he said, and I find myself in a situation I have never encountered in 12 years of military service. He knelt down, bringing his imposing form closer to Sarah's level. This close, she could see that his eyes held intelligence, and something she hadn't expected, uncertainty. In all our encounters with other species, he continued, we have never seen one individual risk their life to protect the young of their enemies. This behavior is unprecedented. Sarah felt one of the uninjured juveniles reaching toward the commander, making soft recognition sounds. Clearly, this was someone familiar to them. A father? Uncle? The family structure of Vorthak society was something human xenobiologists had never fully understood. They know you, Sarah observed quietly. The injured one is my offspring, Zektar admitted, his voice carrying what sounded like emotional strain. Lost during the initial assault when their transport was damaged. We have been searching for survivors for 2 days. The pieces suddenly fit together for Sarah. This wasn't just a military operation anymore. This was a father looking for his lost children, and she had inadvertently placed herself between them during the most dangerous moment of the search. "Then, you understand why I couldn't just walk away," she said. "They needed help." Zektar reached out with one of his 4 arms, gently touching the injured juvenile's head. The small creature responded with soft clicks that were unmistakably affectionate. The other 2 juveniles immediately began moving toward their father, their relief evident in every movement. "You could have used them," he said, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "Bargain for your life, or for information about human defenses. Instead, you risked everything to keep them safe." Sarah watched as the medical personnel arrived and began examining the injured juvenile. Their treatment was gentle and professional, and she was relieved to see that her field dressing had been effective in stabilizing the wound. "I'm a doctor," she said simply, "and a xenobiologist. I took oaths to preserve life, regardless of species. But more than that, they're children. They deserve to grow up in a universe where adults protect them, not use them as weapons." Zektar stood slowly, his massive form towering over her once again. But now the menace was gone, replaced by something Sarah couldn't quite identify. Confusion, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "The human settlement you were defending has been destroyed," he said matter-of-factly. "Your people have retreated to defensive positions in the mountains. This war continues." Sarah nodded, accepting the reality of the situation. "I know, but you," he continued, "will not be harmed. This I decree as commander of this force. You will be escorted to the border of our operational area and released to return to your people. And the juveniles will receive the best medical care our fleet can provide," Zektar assured her. "Thanks to your intervention, my offspring will survive to see another day." As the medical team carefully lifted the injured juvenile onto a stretcher, the small creature looked back towards Sarah and made a soft sound that needed no translation. "Gratitude." The other 2 juveniles followed their sibling, but they too looked back at the human woman who had protected them. In their large eyes, Sarah saw something that gave her hope for the future. "Dr. Chun," Zektar said as his children were loaded into a medical transport, "I do not understand your species. Your behavior defies all tactical logic and survival instinct. But perhaps that is not entirely a weakness." Sarah stood slowly, her legs shaky from the adrenaline that was finally beginning to fade. "Maybe understanding between our species is more possible than either of us thought." "Perhaps," Zektar agreed, though his tone suggested deep uncertainty. "The war continues, but you have given me much to consider." As Sarah was escorted toward the human lines under a flag of truce, she couldn't help but wonder if something had changed in those moments when a human doctor had chosen to protect alien children. Whether the seeds of understanding could grow in the soil of a battlefield remained to be seen. But for the first time since the invasion began, she allowed herself to hope. 3 weeks after the incident in the forest, Commander Zektar found himself staring at intelligence reports that made no sense. Human resistance forces had not only failed to collapse under sustained assault, but were actively helping Vorthack civilians caught in war zones. "Explain this to me again," he demanded, his mandibles clicking with frustrated confusion as he addressed his intelligence officer. Lieutenant Yixnell manipulated the holographic display, showing intercepted human communications. "The humans have established what they call sanctuary zones in areas between active combat sectors. They are treating wounded from both species and providing shelter to non-combatants." "Both species," Zektar repeated slowly. "You mean they're actively aiding Vorthack civilians?" "Confirmed, sir. We have visual evidence of human medical personnel treating Vorthack injuries. They appear to have developed treatment protocols specifically for our biology." Zektar studied the images floating before him. Human doctors working alongside what appeared to be Vorthack civilians who had been separated from military units during the chaotic fighting. Children, elderly, and non-combatants who should have been enemy personnel were instead being cared for, as if they were refugees rather than members of an invading force. "This makes no strategic sense," he muttered. "They gain nothing from this behavior. If anything, it compromises their defensive positions by dividing resources and attention." "Sir," Yixnell said hesitantly, "there's more. The human name Dr. Chun has been specifically mentioned in multiple intercepts. She appears to be organizing these sanctuary efforts." The name struck Zektar like a physical blow. In the weeks since the forest encounter, he had found his thoughts returning again and again to the human woman who had protected his offspring at the cost of her own safety. His children had recovered fully, thanks in large part to her initial treatment, but the memory of her actions continued to disturb his understanding of human nature. "Show me," he commanded. The display shifted to show an intercepted transmission from a human base located deep in the mountain ranges. Dr. Sarachan stood before what appeared to be a mixed group of humans and Vorthak, addressing them in both languages. Her human words were translated for the Vorthak present, while her attempts at the Vorthak language were heavily accented, but understandable. The principle remains the same regardless of species, her translated voice said clearly. Medical necessity takes precedence over political conflict. If someone is injured and needs help, we provide that help. In the background, Zektar could see Vorthak civilians working alongside humans to construct temporary shelters. Young Vorthak played with human children while their parents discussed resource allocation and medical supplies. The scene was so contrary to everything he understood about warfare that he found himself questioning whether the intelligence was accurate. "Verify the authenticity of these transmissions," he ordered. "Already done, sir. They're genuine. What's more, we've received reports from multiple fronts describing similar behavior. Human forces are consistently prioritizing civilian protection over tactical advantage, even when those civilians are our people." Zektar's forearms moved restlessly as he processed this information. In his 12 years of military command, he had seen dozens of species react to Vorthak invasion. Some fought with desperate courage, others attempted to negotiate or surrender, and a few had tried to use Vorthak civilians as hostages or bargaining chips. None had ever simply helped. "What does command make of this intelligence?" he asked. Yixnel's exoskeleton darkened slightly, a sign of discomfort. "Admiral Mortaith believes it to be an elaborate deception, a way to lower our guard or gain intelligence about our civilian population." "And you? What do you believe?" "Sir, I've been analyzing human behavior patterns for this entire campaign. Their tactical decisions consistently prioritize preservation of life over military advantage. This sanctuary program fits their established behavioral profile perfectly." Zektar turned away from the display, his mind churning with implications he wasn't ready to acknowledge. If humans were genuinely committed to protecting civilians regardless of species, it suggested something about their nature that challenged fundamental Vorthak assumptions about the universe. The Vorthak Empire had built its expansion on the principle that sentient species were fundamentally competitive and would always prioritize their own survival above all else. It was why their shock and tactics were so effective. Break an enemy's will to fight by demonstrating the futility of resistance, and they would inevitably surrender rather than face extinction. But humans seem to operate by different rules entirely. "Sir," Yixnel said quietly, "there's one more thing." A message was transmitted on a narrowband frequency, directed specifically at your command codes. Zektar's eyes snapped back to attention. "Explain." "It's from Dr. Chun. She's requesting a meeting." The audacity of it left Zektar momentarily speechless. An enemy combatant was requesting a meeting with the commander of the forces actively trying to destroy her people. The logical response was to ignore it, or perhaps use it as an opportunity to eliminate a significant enemy asset. What are her terms? She wants to discuss prisoner exchange and medical protocols for treating wounded from both species. She's offering to share human medical research that might help with Vorthak biology, specifically treatments for juveniles. The mention of juveniles made Zektar think immediately of his own offspring, now safely recovering aboard the medical frigate. Dr. Chin's treatment had undoubtedly saved his child's life, giving the military doctors crucial time to implement proper care. She also mentions that she has information about Vorthak civilians who may be trapped in combat zones. Yixnel continued. Families separated during the initial assault. Zektar found himself facing a decision that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Everything in his military training told him this was either a trap or a distraction. But the memory of Dr. Chun shielding his children with her own body made him wonder if human motivations might be more complex than Vorthak doctrine suggested. What would be the meeting parameters? Neutral ground. She suggests a location between the lines. Temporary ceasefire for the duration. Medical personnel only, no military escorts. Absolutely not, Zektar said immediately. The security risk is unacceptable. But even as he spoke, he found himself considering the possibilities. What if this was an opportunity to understand human behavior better? To gain insight that might help end the conflict more efficiently? Or perhaps, a small voice in his mind suggested, to understand why a human doctor had been willing to die for Vorthak children. Draft a response, he said slowly. Modified terms. The meeting will take place aboard a neutral medical ship, under observation, but without direct military interference. She may bring 2 medical personnel. I will bring an equivalent escort. Sir, are you certain this is wise? Zektar's mandibles clicked in what might have been dark humor. Wisdom appears to be a relative concept when dealing with humans, Lieutenant. Perhaps it's time we try to understand their particular brand of madness. 2 days later, Zektar found himself aboard a converted transport ship positioned in the neutral zone between human and Vorthak lines. The vessel had been stripped of all weapons and equipped with medical facilities from both species. It represented the first official meeting between human and Vorthak representatives since the invasion began. Dr. Chun arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by a human military medic and a Vorthak civilian who Zektar was surprised to recognize as one of the refugees who had been separated during the initial assault. The civilian was elderly, moving with a careful gait that indicated advanced age for their species. Commander Zektar, Dr. Chun said as she entered the converted meeting room. Thank you for agreeing to this. Dr. Chun, he replied formally. I confess I am uncertain what we hope to accomplish here. Understanding, she said simply, taking a seat across from him. And maybe saving some lives while we're at it. The Vorthak civilian moved slowly to a seat beside Dr. Chun, and Zektar realized with shock that he recognized the individual. Elder Thexmol had been a respected teacher in one of the civilian colonies, specializing in juvenile education. His disappearance during the assault had been noted, but assumed to be casualty-related. Elder Thexmol, Zektar, said respectfully, we believe you have been killed in the initial attack. Nearly was, the elderly Vorthak replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Would have been, if not for these humans. They found me trapped in debris and spent considerable effort to extract me safely. Why? Zektar asked, directing the question to Dr. Chen. He is not your people. Helping him provided no tactical advantage. Because he was hurt and scared, Dr. Chen replied. Same reason I helped your children. It's not complicated, Commander. Life has value regardless of which species it belongs to. Zektar found himself studying the human doctor with fascination. Her behavior remained consistent with what he had observed in the forest, but seeing it in a formal setting made it even more remarkable. She spoke of preserving Vorthak life, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. You mentioned information about separated families, he said. Dr. Chen activated a portable display device, showing a list of names and locations. We've encountered 17 Vorthak civilians in various states of distress, mostly young and elderly who became separated during the fighting. They've been asking about family members, and we thought you might be able to help reunite them. Zektar studied the list, recognizing several names. These were individuals who had been reported missing and presumed dead. To learn that they were not only alive but being cared for by enemy forces was unprecedented. Why are you doing this? He asked again, his voice carrying genuine confusion. Your people are dying in this war. Human colonies have been destroyed. Your defensive positions are under constant attack. Yet you divert resources to care for enemy civilians. Because they're not our enemies, Dr. Chen replied firmly. You are. The military forces invading our territory and destroying our settlements. But civilians? Children and elderly and teachers like Thexmol? They're just people caught in the middle of something they didn't choose. Elder Thexmol clicked his agreement. The human perspective on civilian protection is remarkable, he said to Zektar. They make no distinction between their own non-combatants and ours. All are treated with equal care. This is inefficient, Zektar protested. Resources spent on enemy civilians could be used to strengthen your military position. Could be, Dr. Chen agreed. But then we'd be the kind of species that values tactical advantage over basic compassion. Is that the kind of universe you want to live in, Commander? One where children are expendable if they belong to the wrong side. The question struck Zektar harder than he expected. He thought of his own offspring, safe now because of this human's intervention. What if the situation had been reversed? What if human forces had found injured Vorthack juveniles in a war zone? According to Vorthack doctrine, the logical action would have been to eliminate them as future threats or use them as leverage. But Dr. Chun had risked her life to protect them instead. I don't understand your species, he said honestly. That's okay, Dr. Chun replied with what might have been a smile. We don't always understand ourselves either. But we try to do what we think is right, even when it's difficult. And what do you think is right in this situation? An end to the fighting, she said immediately. But failing that, protection for anyone who isn't actively participating in combat. War is bad enough without deliberately targeting civilians. Zektar found himself considering possibilities that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. The human approach to civilian protection suggested a fundamental difference in how their species viewed conflict and survival. It wasn't weakness, as Vorthack doctrine suggested. It was something else entirely. You mentioned medical protocols, he said, changing the subject to safer ground. Dr. Chin brightened considerably. Yes, we've been treating Vorthack injuries for weeks now, and we've learned a lot about your biology. Some of our standard treatments work well, others need modification. We thought sharing information might help both our medical personnel save more lives. You would share medical knowledge with your enemies. We would share medical knowledge with doctors trying to save lives, she corrected. Politics doesn't belong in a medical bay, Commander. When someone is hurt, the only thing that matters is helping them get better. For the next 2 hours, Zektar found himself engaged in the most unusual conversation of his military career. Dr. Chun and her medical officer provided detailed information about treating Vorthack physiology, while Thexmol offered cultural insights about civilian needs and behaviors. In return, Zektar found himself sharing information about Vorthack medical protocols and the locations of several missing civilians. It felt like betraying military doctrine, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow the right thing to do. There's one more thing, Dr. Chun said as the meeting began to wind down. We'd like to establish a formal medical exchange program. Injured personnel from both sides treated at neutral facilities return to their own forces upon recovery. Absolutely impossible, Zektar said reflexively. The security implications alone would be staggering. Think about it, she urged. How many of your people are dying from injuries that could be treated if they had access to proper facilities? How many of ours are dying for the same reason? We could save lives on both sides. And what would prevent either side from gaining military intelligence from captured personnel? The same thing that prevents us from interrogating the civilians we're already treating, Dr. Chen replied. Medical ethics. The principle that healing takes precedence over warfare. Zektar found himself without an immediate response. The concept of medical ethics superseding military necessity was foreign to Vorthack thinking, but he had seen evidence of its reality in human behavior. I will consider your proposal, he said finally. But I make no promises. That's all we ask, Dr. Chen said. Consideration. As the meeting concluded and preparations were made for departure, Zektar found himself alone with Dr. Chen for a moment while the others organized transport arrangements. Why did you really request this meeting? He asked quietly. Because 3 weeks ago, you showed me that even in the middle of a war, a father's love for his children could overcome military protocol, she replied. I thought maybe that meant there was hope for something better between our species. And what do you think now? Dr. Chen looked at him thoughtfully. I think you're asking the right questions, Commander. That's usually the first step toward finding the right answers. As Zektar watched the human transport disappear into the distance, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his understanding of this conflict. The war would continue, but perhaps not in the same way it had before. For the first time since the invasion began, he found himself wondering if victory was worth the cost, and whether there might be other ways to define success in dealing with humanity. The questions Dr. Chun had raised would follow him back to his command ship, where they would challenge everything he thought he knew about warfare, survival, and the nature of civilization itself. Admiral Mortaith's rage filled the command chamber of the dreadnought Eternal Conquest like a toxic cloud. His massive form paced behind the strategic display, his 4 arms gesticulating wildly as he processed the latest reports from the human front. Explain to me, he snarled at the assembled commanders, how a supposedly primitive species has managed to not only resist our assault for 2 months, but actually convert our own civilians to their cause. Commander Zektar stood at attention among the other field commanders, his expression carefully neutral. In the weeks since his meeting with Dr. Chun, he had been walking a dangerous line between military duty and growing doubts about the campaign's methods. Sir, reported Commander Valketh from the northern sectors, human resistance has taken an unexpected form. Instead of concentrating on military targets, they appear to be focusing on humanitarian efforts. Humanitarian, Mortaith repeated, the word carrying contempt. Explain. They have established medical stations throughout contested territories, treating wounded from both species. Our intelligence indicates they are diverting significant military resources to these efforts, weakening their defensive capabilities. Then, why haven't we achieved decisive victory? Mortaith demanded. Valketh's exoskeleton darkened with discomfort. Because, sir, our own civilians have begun cooperating with these efforts, providing intelligence, assisting with logistics, and, in some cases, actively defending human medical facilities from our own forces. The silence that followed was deafening. Mortaith's multiple eyes focused on each commander in turn, seeking answers that none were prepared to give. Commander Zektar, the admiral said slowly, you have had direct contact with the human leadership. Explain this behavior. Zektar felt the weight of every eye in the room focusing on him. The truth was complex and difficult to explain within the framework of traditional Vorthak military thinking. But the admiral was waiting for an answer. Sir, human behavior appears to be driven by principles that supersede immediate tactical advantage, he said carefully. They prioritize civilian protection and medical care regardless of species affiliation. That's not military strategy. That's insanity. Mortaith snapped. No species survives by prioritizing enemy welfare over their own survival. And yet, Zektar replied quietly, they are surviving. More than that, they are gaining tactical advantages through means we didn't anticipate. Elaborate. Zektar activated his personal display, showing intelligence gathered over the past weeks. Human medical stations have become information hubs. Grateful civilians provide intelligence about our troop movements, supply routes, and strategic plans. What appears to be resource waste is actually an intelligence network more effective than anything we've encountered. You're suggesting their humanitarian efforts are a cover for espionage operations? No, sir. I believe their humanitarian efforts are genuine, but the intelligence gathering is a secondary benefit they've learned to utilize. Commander Valketh stepped forward. There's more, Admiral. We've identified several instances where human forces have warned our civilian populations about incoming attacks, allowing them to evacuate before strikes occurred. They're warning our civilians about our own military operations? Confirmed. In at least 12 documented cases, humans have provided advance warning to Vorthak civilian settlements, resulting in 0 non-combatant casualties during subsequent military actions. Mortaith's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. This is impossible. No species behaves this way during active warfare. Sir, Zektar said carefully, perhaps we need to consider that our assumptions about universal behavior patterns may be incomplete. The Admiral's eyes fixed on him with dangerous intensity. Are you questioning fundamental military doctrine, Commander? I'm questioning whether our doctrine applies to a species that operates by completely different principles, Zektar replied. Human behavior suggests they value civilian life above military advantage. This creates tactical situations we haven't encountered before. It creates opportunities. Mortaith corrected harshly. If they value civilian life above military necessity, we can use that weakness against them. Sir, we've tried that approach. It hasn't been effective. Then, we haven't tried hard enough. I want increased pressure on human civilian targets. Force them to choose between protecting their own people and maintaining their misguided assistance to ours. Zektar felt something cold settle in his stomach. Admiral, that strategy may result in significant Vorthak civilian casualties. Our people who are being sheltered in human medical facilities would be at risk. Acceptable losses, Mortaith said dismissively. Any Vorthak civilian who would accept enemy assistance over loyalty to the Empire is already compromised. Their elimination serves the greater good. The casual dismissal of civilian lives struck Zektar like a physical blow. He thought of Elder Thexmol, the respected teacher who had spoken so eloquently about human compassion, of the injured children he had seen in human medical facilities, receiving care that was often superior to what they would have received from their own forces. Sir, Commander Valketh said hesitantly, there may be complications with that approach. Intelligence suggests that human forces have developed strong protective instincts regarding any civilians under their care, regardless of species. Attacks on facilities containing Vorthack civilians have resulted in unexpectedly fierce human resistance. They're defending our people with extreme prejudice, sir. Human forces that might retreat when defending military positions will fight to the death when protecting medical facilities or civilian shelters. It appears to be a psychological trigger that overrides normal tactical thinking. Mortaith studied the strategic displays with growing frustration. Every traditional approach to breaking enemy resistance seemed to produce unexpected results when applied to humans. Their refusal to follow established patterns of behavior was making the campaign far more complex than anticipated. What about their military leadership? He asked. Surely they recognized the strategic folly of their current approach. Actually, sir, Zektar said quietly, the humanitarian efforts appear to be fully supported by human military command. We've intercepted communications indicating that civilian protection is considered a core strategic objective, not a secondary concern. That makes no sense whatsoever. Unless, Zektar continued, their definition of victory is different from ours. If they measure success by lives preserved rather than territory conquered, their behavior becomes strategically logical. The room fell silent as the commanders processed this possibility. The idea that a species might fight a war with the primary goal of minimizing casualties rather than maximizing damage was so foreign to Vorthack thinking that it challenged basic assumptions about the nature of conflict. Sir, reported the communications officer, we're receiving a transmission from the human leadership. It's addressed to Admiral Mortaith personally. On screen, the main display activated, showing a human in military uniform standing in what appeared to be a medical facility. Behind him, Zektar could see humans and Vorthack working together to treat wounded individuals for both species. Admiral Mortaith, the human said in accented but understandable Vorthack, I am General Harrison, military commander of human forces in this sector. I'm contacting you to propose a temporary ceasefire for medical purposes. Explain, Mortaith said curtly. We have wounded personnel from both our species who require immediate medical evacuation. Some of your people are in critical condition and need access to Vorthack medical facilities that can treat their specific physiology. Similarly, we have human wounded who need specialized treatment. You want me to provide medical assistance to your wounded in exchange for treating ours. I'm offering a temporary suspension of hostilities to allow medical evacuation for anyone who needs it, regardless of species. 24 hours, clearly marked medical transports, neutral corridors for evacuation. Mortaith's mandibles clicked with disbelief. You're offering to save the lives of Vorthack military personnel who will return to fight against you? Yes, General Harrison replied without hesitation. Because they're wounded soldiers, not enemies. There's a difference. This is madness. This is medical necessity, the human corrected. We both have people dying who don't need to die. Politics can wait 24 hours. Zektar watched the exchange with fascination. The human general was essentially offering to strengthen Vorthack military forces in order to save lives. It was tactical suicide according to every military doctrine he had ever studied, yet the humans seemed to consider it the obvious choice. What guarantees do you offer that this isn't a deception? Mortaith demanded. The same guarantee you're offering us, General Harrison replied. The understanding that some things are more important than winning a war. Nothing is more important than victory. I respectfully disagree, Admiral. Maintaining our humanity is more important than victory. And I suspect that, deep down, maintaining your own principles is more important to you than conquest. The transmission ended, leaving the command chamber in stunned silence. Mortaith stared at the blank screen as if trying to will the human general back into existence, so he could argue further. Sir, Zektar said quietly, there are 17 Vorthack wounded in critical condition who would benefit from this exchange. Without proper treatment, they'll die within hours. And how many human wounded would we be saving in return? Does it matter? Zektar asked, then immediately realized how the question sounded. Does it matter? Mortaith repeated dangerously. Are you suggesting that enemy casualties are irrelevant to our strategic planning? I'm suggesting that medical evacuations shouldn't be strategic decisions, Zektar replied. They should be medical ones. You sound like them, Mortaith observed coldly. Like the humans. Are you becoming infected with their irrational compassion, Commander? The accusation hung in the air like a physical threat. Zektar realized he was at a crossroads that would determine not just his career, but possibly his survival. Mortaith was clearly looking for signs of disloyalty among his commanders. "Sir, I'm concerned about the lives of Vorthak personnel under my command," he said carefully. "If this exchange can save their lives, shouldn't we consider it? At the cost of also saving enemy lives? Absolutely not. Even if those enemy lives include medical personnel who have been treating our wounded." Mortaith's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "Several of the human wounded are doctors and medics who have been providing care to Vorthak civilians and military personnel. Dr. Chun specifically has saved more Vorthak lives than some of our own medical officers." "The human from your forest encounter?" "Yes, sir. She's currently in critical condition after her medical facility was caught in an artillery bombardment. She was injured while protecting Vorthak patients during the attack." The admission seemed to surprise everyone in the room. A human medical officer had been injured while protecting Vorthak wounded during a Vorthak artillery attack. The irony was almost too complex to process. "She was shielding our people again," Commander Valketh observed quietly. "It appears to be consistent behavior," Zektar confirmed. "Human medical personnel prioritize patient protection regardless of species affiliation, even at personal risk." Mortaith paced behind the command console, his movements agitated and uncertain. The situation had evolved far beyond traditional military parameters, creating ethical and tactical dilemmas that weren't covered in any strategic manual. "If I authorize this exchange," he said slowly, "I'm essentially acknowledging that human medical personnel have legitimate claim to protection under medical neutrality protocols." "Yes, sir," Zektar agreed, "which would set a precedent for treating this conflict as a formal war rather than a pacification operation." "Yes, sir, and it would legitimize human claims to civilian protection and medical neutrality." "Sir," Commander Valketh interjected, "those claims already exist. The humans are acting on them regardless of whether we acknowledge them. The question is whether we want to participate in medical exchanges or continue to lose personnel who could be saved." Mortaith stopped pacing and stared at the strategic display showing casualty reports. The numbers were higher than anticipated, and many of the losses were medical personnel and support staff rather than combat soldiers. "Dr. Chun," he said suddenly, "the human who protected Commander Zektar's offspring. She's among the wounded. Critical condition," Zektar confirmed. "Blunt force trauma and internal injuries from debris. She was found covering 3 Vorthak patients when a medical facility collapsed. 3 Vorthak patients, including 1 juvenile who was separated from its family during the fighting. Dr. Chin apparently refused to evacuate until all patients were secured." Mortaith's mandibles clicked slowly as he processed this information. The human doctor who had first demonstrated the incomprehensible behavior that was defining this conflict had been injured while once again protecting Vorthak lives. What are her chances of survival? Without immediate access to human medical facilities and specialists familiar with her injuries, very low. The techniques required for treating severe human trauma are beyond our current medical capabilities. "And if she dies?" "Sir, what happens to this conflict if Dr. Chun dies while in human custody after being injured protecting our people?" Zektar considered the question carefully. "I believe it would eliminate any possibility of peaceful resolution, sir. She has become a symbol of the possibility for understanding between our species." "A symbol?" "Yes, sir. Both sides know her story. Her death would likely be seen as proof that cooperation is impossible." Mortaith stood silently for long minutes, his multiple eyes reviewing data streams and casualty reports. Finally, he turned to face his commanders. "Signal the humans," he said quietly. "We accept their medical exchange proposal. 24-hour ceasefire, neutral corridors, medical transports only." "Sir, and Commander Zektar, you'll personally oversee the transport of human medical personnel to their facilities. I want them to receive the best possible care during transit." "Yes, sir. Particularly Dr. Chun." Zektar felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. Mortaith was making a decision that went against fundamental military doctrine, and everyone present knew it. "Sir," Commander Valketh said carefully, "may I ask what change you're thinking?" Mortaith's gaze moved around the room, studying each of his officers. "I realize that if we allow a symbol of hope to die through our inaction, we become the kind of species that destroys hope itself. And I'm not certain that's who we want to be. As orders were transmitted to implement the ceasefire and medical exchange, Zektar found himself wondering if this moment would be remembered as the beginning of the end of the war or as the beginning of something entirely new. Either way, he realized it had started with a human doctor protecting alien children in a forest, and it was continuing with military commanders choosing compassion over tactics. Perhaps Dr. Chun had been right about the possibility of understanding between their species. Perhaps hope was more powerful than anyone had realized. 6 months had passed since the first medical exchange, and the war between humans and Vorthak had transformed into something neither species had experienced before. What had begun as a straightforward invasion had evolved into a complex dance of cooperation and conflict that defied every military manual ever written. Dr. Sarah Chun stood in the observation deck of the Joint Medical Station Harmony, watching as human and Vorthak personnel worked together to treat casualties from both sides. Her recovery from the injuries sustained during the artillery bombardment had been long and difficult, but it had provided an unexpected opportunity for both species to learn about treating severe trauma across biological differences. The integration continues to exceed projections, reported Dr. Kexval, a Vorthak medical officer who had become one of her closest colleagues during the past months. Mortality rates are down 40% since we began sharing treatment protocols. More importantly, Sarah replied, we're learning that our species aren't as different as either side originally believed. Pain is pain, fear is fear, hope is hope. Biology might differ, but the fundamentals of consciousness seem remarkably similar. Through the transparent aluminum viewing panel, they could see the latest arrivals being processed. A mix of human and Vorthak wounded, some military, some civilian, all receiving the same standard of care regardless of which side of the conflict they had been on when injured. Dr. Chun, came a voice behind them. They turned to see Commander Zektar approaching, his gait showing the slight limp he had developed after taking shrapnel during a rescue operation 3 weeks earlier. Admiral Mortaith has requested another meeting. This time, he wants to include the human military command. Sarah exchanged glances with Dr. Kexval. These meetings had become increasingly frequent as both sides struggled to understand what their conflict had become. Traditional military objectives were becoming meaningless when soldiers from both armies were more likely to be found building medical facilities than destroying them. What's the agenda this time? Sarah asked. The Vorthak High Command is confused, Zektar admitted. Our initial invasion objectives have become impossible to achieve, but not because of military resistance. We can't conquer a species that keeps saving our lives. And the human leadership, from what I understand, equally perplexed. They're winning a war they never wanted to fight by not fighting it in any way that makes tactical sense. Sarah nodded. The situation had become a source of fascination for xenopsychologists and military theorists throughout known space. News of the human Vorthak conflict had spread to other civilizations, not because of its military significance, but because of its complete absence of traditional warfare characteristics. When is the meeting? Tomorrow. Neutral space, full diplomatic protocols. Both sides want to discuss options. Options for what? Zektar's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned to recognize as uncertainty. For how to end a war when neither side wants to fight it anymore. The meeting took place aboard the diplomatic vessel Understanding, a converted transport ship that had been refitted specifically for interspecies negotiations. The main conference room was designed to accommodate both human and Vorthak physiology, with adjustable seating and environmental controls that could maintain comfortable conditions for both species. Admiral Mortaith entered with a small retinue of advisors, his imposing presence somewhat diminished by the fact that half the humans in the room had saved Vorthak lives at some point during the past months. General Harrison led the human delegation, accompanied by Sarah and several other medical and civilian representatives. This is unprecedented, Mortaith began without preamble. In 300 years of imperial expansion, the Vorthak Empire has never encountered a situation like this one. We're not exactly experienced with this either, General Harrison replied. Our military doctrine doesn't include procedures for fighting enemies who keep helping us. The problem, Mortaith continued, is that traditional measures of military success have become meaningless. We cannot claim territorial conquest when our own civilians refuse to support occupation of areas where they receive better treatment from enemy forces than from their own military. Sarah spoke up. Maybe the problem isn't military. Maybe it's that you're trying to solve a diplomatic situation with military solutions. Elaborate. What does the Vorthak Empire actually want from this sector? She asked. I mean, what are your real objectives here? Mortaith's multiple eyes focused on her with what might have been surprise. Territory, resources, strategic positioning for further expansion. And what has this conflict cost you so far? Considerable military resources, extended deployment times, and he hesitated. And unprecedented challenges to imperial doctrine and unity, Zektar supplied quietly. In other words, Sarah continued, this war is expensive, ineffective, and causing internal problems. Meanwhile, the cooperation between our species during medical operations has produced advances in xenobiology, engineering, and tactical coordination that neither side could have achieved independently. General Harrison leaned forward. Dr. Chun, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe conquest isn't the only way to achieve imperial objectives. What if cooperation was more effective than subjugation? The silence that followed was profound. The concept she was proposing challenged fundamental assumptions about how interstellar civilizations interacted with each other. You're talking about alliance, Mortaith said slowly, between the Empire and humanity. I'm talking about partnership, Sarah corrected. Mutual benefit instead of zero-sum competition. The Empire doesn't form alliances with inferior species. Admiral, General Harrison said quietly. With all due respect, which species is inferior here? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like our people have been pretty evenly matched. More importantly, we've been more effective working together than fighting each other. Zektar activated a holographic display showing medical statistics from the past months. Human Vorthak medical teams have achieved treatment success rates 30% higher than either species working independently. Combined engineering projects have reduced construction time for medical facilities by 50%. Joint tactical operations have resulted in 0 civilian casualties during evacuation operations. You've been tracking cooperation statistics? Mortaith asked. Sir, they're impossible to ignore. Every measure of operational effectiveness improves when our species work together. Dr. Kexval, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. Admiral, I've worked with human medical personnel for months now. Their knowledge of trauma treatment, combined with our understanding of biological systems, has created treatment protocols that are revolutionary. We could save thousands of lives across the Empire if this cooperation continued. And what would humans gain from such an arrangement? Mortaith asked. General Harrison considered the question carefully. Access to Vorthak technology, particularly in materials science and biotechnology. Cultural exchange opportunities. Most importantly, security. If we're partners instead of enemies, we don't have to worry about future invasion attempts. You assume the Empire would be willing to treat humanity as equals. I assume the Empire is practical enough to recognize mutual benefit when they see it, Sarah said. The question is whether imperial pride is more important than imperial prosperity. Mortaith's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of intense thought. Even if such an arrangement were desirable, the political complications would be enormous. The Empire has never entered into partnerships with previously targeted species. Then, maybe it's time for the Empire to evolve, Sarah suggested. Growth doesn't always have to mean conquest. Sometimes it means adaptation. Dr. Chun, Zektar said quietly, you're proposing a fundamental change to the basic structure of galactic civilization. I'm proposing that we learn from what's already working, she replied. Our species fight better when we're fighting together than when we're fighting each other. We solve problems better when we're combining our knowledge instead of trying to destroy each other's civilizations. Maybe it's time to make that official. Admiral Mortaith stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars that represented the vast expanse of the Empire. The political ramifications of such a decision would extend far beyond this sector. Other species would expect similar treatment. The entire imperial model would be called into question. Is that necessarily bad? General Harrison asked. I mean, how many other potential partners has the Empire destroyed instead of embracing? How much knowledge, how many solutions to imperial problems have been lost because conquest was chosen over cooperation? You're asking me to recommend the dismantling of 3 centuries of imperial policy. We're asking you to recommend 3 centuries of imperial evolution, Sarah corrected, building on what you've achieved while adapting to new possibilities. The discussion continued for hours, ranging over everything from practical trade arrangements to philosophical questions about the nature of civilization. Gradually, a framework began to emerge for what a human-Vorthack partnership might look like. Shared research initiatives, joint exploration projects, cultural exchange programs, and mutual defense agreements. Instead of humanity becoming a subjugated member of the Empire, they would become the Empire's first true partner species, setting a precedent for how the Vorthack might interact with other civilizations in the future. There would have to be a trial period, Mortaith said finally. A formal agreement covering this sector only, with careful monitoring of results. That's reasonable, General Harrison agreed. We're not suggesting anyone leap into this blindly. And there would need to be significant safeguards to ensure that neither side could use the partnership to gain military advantage over the other. Also reasonable. The medical cooperation would continue and expand with formal protocol for sharing research and treatment methods. Absolutely. As the details were discussed and refined, Sarah found herself watching the faces around the table. Human and Vorthack representatives working together to solve complex problems, building on a trust that had developed through months of shared medical efforts. You know, she said during a break in the negotiations, 6 months ago, I was running through a forest trying to escape Vorthack soldiers. Now, I'm helping design a partnership that could change how our entire galaxy thinks about interspecies relations. Zektar's mandibles clicked in what she had learned was Vorthack amusement. 6 months ago, I was planning the conquest of human settlements. Now I'm arguing for why my empire should treat humans as equals. Perhaps change is more possible than any of us realized. It started with you protecting my offspring, he continued. One act of compassion in the middle of a war zone. Everything else grew from that moment. Not just from that moment, Sarah replied. From every moment when someone chose to help instead of hurt, to build instead of destroy, to hope instead of fear. Those moments add up. Admiral Mortaith approached them, his expression showing the weight of the decision he was about to make. I will recommend to the High Command that we implement a partnership trial, he said. 1 year, this sector only, with joint oversight and regular evaluation. And if it works? General Harrison asked. If it works, Mortaith replied, then perhaps the Empire will learn that there are more ways to grow than through conquest alone. As the meeting concluded and the various delegations prepared to return to their respective commands, Sarah found herself thinking about the small Vorthack juveniles she had protected in the forest so many months ago. They were healthy now, growing up in a universe where humans and Vorthack were learning to be partners instead of enemies. Perhaps that was the real victory. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the creation of hope for something better. The war was ending, not with conquest or surrender, but with the recognition that some things were more important than winning. Understanding was possible, cooperation was more effective than conflict, and compassion could indeed bridge the gap between species that had seemed utterly alien to each other. As the ship Understanding departed for human space, carrying the framework for what might become the galaxy's first interspecies partnership, Sarah looked out at the stars and wondered how many other civilizations might be watching, waiting to see if evolution was possible for species that had built their success on conquest. The answer would shape the future of the galaxy, and it had started with a single human doctor who believed that protecting children was more important than protecting herself. Some victories, Sarah reflected, were worth more than conquest. They were worth everything.